Imagine a king, right? He's completely backed into a corner by two invading armies.
Right.
And he walks into a valley just outside his capital city, and he does the unthinkable. He literally sets his own child on fire.
Yeah, it's horrific.
All just to buy a political miracle. So today, we aren't just looking at, a dry timeline of ancient battles. We are opening up a full psychological autopsy of a ruler who dismantled his faith, like piece by piece, just to survive.
Absolutely. We're examining the reign of King Ahaz of Judah.
Welcome to this deep dive. You are here because you have a drive to extract profound meaning from complex ancient history. You don't just want the chronological fact, you want the why.
Exactly.
So our mission today is to dissect a singular, staggering text. We're looking at 2 Kings chapter 16 from the King James Version of the Bible.
And this is not just some ancient historical ledger.
No, not at all.
It's an absolute masterclass in the anatomy of fear, of institutional compromise, and really the devastating creeping ripple effects of spiritual decay.
Yeah, it really is.
We are exploring one of the darkest portraits of leadership in the entire Old Testament. I mean, Ahaz didn't just casually drift away from God.
Right, wasn't an accident.
No, he actively and systematically replaced him. He dismantled the very architecture of his faith for this fleeting illusion of political security.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. This text forces us to look at what happens when absolute terror completely overtakes a divine covenant.
Right. But we do have to remember the decisions Ahaz makes are catastrophic, obviously, but they don't happen in a vacuum.
Very true.
He inherited a chaotic, deeply divided world. You cannot judge the king without seeing the geopolitical chessboard first.
You really can't. You have to grasp the tragedy of this text by understanding the 200-year-old family feud that ripped his nation apart.
So let's get into that. The nation fractured right after King Solomon's death. This is around 930 BC.
Yeah, roughly.
Solomon's son, Rehoboam, comes into power, and he actually threatened to tax the people even heavier than his father did.
Which was already a lot.
Exactly. And that sparked a massive civil war. The unified kingdom of Israel split into 2 distinct, often warring entities.
Right. So in the north, you have 10 tribes forming the northern kingdom.
And they get called a few different things, right?
They do. In the prophetic literature, like if you're reading Isaiah or Hosea, this northern kingdom is usually called Ephraim, after its dominant tribe.
Or sometimes Samaria, right?
Samaria after its capital city. And sometimes the prophets even refer to it as the house of Omri or the house of Jacob.
Okay, so that's the north.
And the north, I mean, it was in a permanent spiritual death spiral from the very moment of that fracture.
How so?
Well, the very first king of the northern kingdom, Jeroboam I, he faced a massive political dilemma.
Right, because of the temple.
Exactly. The temple, the whole center of worship, was located in Jerusalem, which was down in the south.
In enemy territory, basically.
Yeah. So Jeroboam feared that if his citizens kept traveling south to worship, their political loyalties would eventually shift back to the southern king.
That makes political sense, yeah.
It does. But his solution was disastrous. He set up 2 golden calves, one in Bethel and one up in Dan, and he declared them the new gods of Israel.
Wow. Just completely rewriting the religion.
Yeah. And the biblical text uses the sin of Jeroboam as this perpetual standard of wickedness for everyone who comes after him.
Like a benchmark for being awful.
Basically, yeah. For over 2 centuries, the northern kingdom completely abandoned the worship of Yahweh. They suffered through this crazy legacy of assassination and idolatry.
It really reads like a mafia history.
Ah, totally. You have Nadab, Baasha, Elah, Zimri.
Wait, Zimri's the one who only lasted a week, right?
Yes, he reigned for exactly 7 days before he literally burned his own palace down on top of himself.
That is just pure chaos.
It is. Then you get Omri, Ahab, Jehu, and eventually Pekah. And Pekah is the guy on the throne during the events of our deep dive today.
Okay, so that's the north, complete chaos. Then on the other side of the border, you have the southern kingdom, Judah, and they hold the holy city, so they are interchangeably called Jerusalem, Zion, or the House of David.
Yeah, because they have Solomon's temple. Theologically, they are the keepers of the flame.
They hold the unbroken line of Davidic kings, which carries the ultimate messianic promise.
Exactly. But trying to follow the history of these 2 kingdoms is notoriously maddening.
Oh, it is the worst. Kings in both kingdoms often shared names at the exact same time.
Yeah, it's so confusing for readers.
It's like trying to follow modern history. If 2 rival political factions constantly name their leaders the exact same names just to claim legitimacy.
That's a great way to put it.
I mean, you have a Jehoram in the north and a Jehoram in the south.
Right, a Joash in the north, a Joash in the south.
And some had both throne names and birth names, right? Like Uzziah.
Yeah, Uzziah is also known as Azariah. It makes tracking the timeline really difficult.
So how do we categorize the kings of the southern kingdom without just reading a phone book of names?
The best way to look at it is to understand the severe psychological whiplash the citizens of Judah experienced.
Whiplash is a good word for it.
Because you had kings who were deeply righteous, pushing massive spiritual reforms, kings like Asa and Jehoshaphat.
Right.
But then the pendulum swings violently to leaders like Jehoram and Ahaziah, and then you get a usurper queen, Athaliah.
Oh, she was brutal.
She actually tried to murder all her own grandchildren just to wipe out the royal line.
Her own grandchildren. It's Game of Thrones level stuff.
It really is. Then the pendulum swings back to relative stability with Joash, Amaziah, Uzziah, and Jotham.
Okay, so a stretch of fairly decent or at least stable kings.
Yeah. But by the time our subject, Ahaz, takes the throne, the citizens of Judah have lived through generations of this spiritual instability.
So they are primed for disaster.
Exactly. But you have to understand, the specific lineage of the House of David is critical before we judge Ahaz.
Why is that? Why is the House of David concept so vital for you, the listener, to grasp?
Because the House of David is not merely a political dynasty, it's a divine unconditional covenant.
Right. From back in 2 Samuel.
Yes. God promised David that his house and his kingdom would endure forever, and that from his lineage would come the ultimate Messiah.
So the stakes are quite literally cosmic.
Absolutely. When the southern kingdom is threatened, or when its king goes rogue, like Ahaz does, it isn't just a national crisis.
The promised bloodline of the Messiah itself is under threat.
Yes. If the House of David falls, the entire redemptive plan of history fails.
Wow. Okay, so with that immense geopolitical and spiritual weight hanging in the balance, Ahaz ascends to the throne of Judah at age 20.
He's young.
Very young. And he reigns for 16 years in Jerusalem. But unlike his ancestor David, the text states he did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord.
No, he goes the opposite direction.
He walks in the ways of the wicked northern kings. And the descent is shockingly rapid.
It really is.
He engages in the absolute darkest practice of ancient Near Eastern paganism. Verse 3 says he, quote, made his son to pass through the fire according to the abominations of the heathen.
Yeah, and that phrase, pass through the fire, it requires a deeply uncomfortable historical examination.
Let's get into it because I know people try to explain this away.
They do. Some historical revisionists have tried to soften this. They suggest it was merely a ritualistic purification ceremony.
Like just walking swiftly between 2 bonfires or something.
Right, like a dangerous dare, but not lethal. But the historical and archaeological records are absolutely emphatic that this is not a metaphor.
It's literal.
In the ancient Semitic world, this refers to literal, horrific child sacrifice.
Wow.
Specifically, it was the burning of an infant or a young child as a votive offering to a pagan deity, most prominently Molech.
And where did this happen? The geography of this is crazy.
It adds a whole other layer of grim theology. This took place in the Valley of Hinnom, which is just south of the walls of Jerusalem.
Literally right outside the holy city.
Yes. And this valley later becomes known as Gehenna.
Which is the word Jesus uses for hell in the New Testament.
Exactly. And down in that valley, there was a specific shrine called Topheth. Topheth translates roughly to place of burning or place of spitting.
That's just dark. And the rest of the Bible doesn't hold back on this, right?
Not at all. The biblical text is relentless in its condemnation. Leviticus 18.21 strictly forbids offering any offspring to Molech.
Right.
Deuteronomy 12.31, Jeremiah 7.31, Ezekiel 16.21, and Psalm 106, they all confirm that the Israelites who adopted this practice were literally shedding innocent blood.
Sacrificing their own sons and daughters to demons.
Yes, it was an absolute abomination.
So if you're listening to this, think about the psychological leap required for a Judean king to do this. A man raised in the shadow of Solomon's temple carrying the messianic bloodline.
Yeah.
For him to walk down into the valley of Hinnom and murder his own child is staggering.
It's almost incomprehensible.
This isn't just ignoring the foundation of your faith. It's like dismantling your own home to build a shrine to the arsonist.
That is a perfect analogy.
How does a mind degrade from simply drifting from God to committing ritualistic infanticide? Like, what is the psychology there?
You really have to look at the brutal transactional mechanics of ancient paganism.
Okay, break that down.
Ancient polytheistic systems operated on a sliding scale of terror and payment. The foundational belief was that extreme crises require the most precious, costly sacrifices.
So the worse the situation, the higher the price.
Exactly. The pagan gods do not respond to cheap grace. They only respond to maximum payment.
And Ahaz was in a crisis.
Ahaz was staring down the barrel of complete national annihilation. His faith in the God of his ancestors had completely collapsed.
And when true faith collapses, it leaves a vacuum.
Right, an existential void. And that void is instantly filled by desperate, fearful bargains with dark forces.
So he thinks he has to buy his way out of this.
Yes. Ahaz's mind reached a terrifying, logical conclusion based on pagan theology. He basically thought, I need a miracle to save my throne, and I must offer the most valuable thing I possess to purchase it.
His own child.
His own future.
It perfectly illustrates the blinding progression of fear. Idolatry demands absolutely everything from you, your future, your bloodline, your morality, and it gives you absolutely nothing in return.
Nothing at all.
But his psychological break didn't happen out of nowhere. It was forged in the crucible of an existential military threat.
Right. The theological failure we're analyzing was triggered directly by a political crisis.
The Syro-Ephraimite War.
Okay.
Let's get into the geopolitical chessboard here. What has happened?
Okay, so King Pekah of the northern kingdom of Israel.
Ephraim.
Right, Ephraim.
Yeah.
And King Rezin of Syria, who was operating out of Damascus.
Okay.
They formed a military coalition. Their objective was to create a united front against the rising apex predator of the ancient world.
The Neo-Assyrian Empire.
Yes. The Assyrians were expanding westward, and they were literally swallowing entire nations whole.
It's just a terrifying military machine.
Unstoppable. So Israel and Syria demanded that Judah join their anti-Syrian alliance.
They want a buffer zone.
Yes. But Ahaz refused.
Okay.
So Israel and Syria turned their armies against their own brother. They besieged Jerusalem.
To force him into the coalition.
Or to assassinate him and place a puppet king on the throne of David who would do whatever they wanted.
And they don't just surround the capital. They wage a total economic war. The text in verse 6 notes that King Rezin of Syria captures the strategic Red Sea port of Elath.
Which is a devastating blow.
Right. Elath was the gateway for maritime trade. It was bringing in gold, exotic goods, and massive wealth to Judah.
The loss of Elath completely crippled Judah financially.
So the supply lines are cut, the economy is tanking, the enemy is literally camped outside the gates of Jerusalem.
Yeah, it's a nightmare scenario.
Now, I look at this from a strictly geopolitical lens, and honestly, I struggle to condemn Ahaz here.
Really? How so?
Well, his capital is starving. The port is gone. If he doesn't do something drastic, his people are slaughtered by Rezin and Pekah.
True.
It feels less like an abdication of faith and more like a desperate trolley problem. From a secular viewpoint, going to Assyria for help looks like the only viable military strategy.
From a purely earthly perspective, yes.
So why is his choice viewed by the text as the ultimate betrayal rather than just necessary pragmatism?
Because the geopolitical reality, as grim as it was, wasn't the whole picture. The theological reality is what dictates the text's condemnation.
Ahaz wasn't alone in this.
Exactly. He was not abandoned to solve this trolley problem by himself.
Right. We have to pull an Isaiah here.
Yes. In the book of Isaiah, specifically chapter 7, we see the behind-the-scenes reality of this siege.
Oh, what happens?
God sends the prophet Isaiah directly to Ahaz with a lifeline. Isaiah tells the king to stay calm, to not lose heart.
God literally speaks to him.
He does. God explicitly promises that the invasion by Rezin and Pekah will fail. He calls these two enemy kings nothing more than, quote, smoldering stumps of firewood.
Just burned out ends.
Yes. God literally offers to protect the house of David. He even invites Ahaz to ask for any miraculous sign to prove it.
Anything at all.
Right. From the depths of the earth to the highest heavens. But Ahaz cloaks his rejection in this false piety.
He says, oh, I won't test the Lord.
Yeah, I will not tempt the Lord. But his mind is already made up. He doesn't want divine deliverance. He wants imperial military power.
He wants something he can see.
Exactly.
So Ahaz strips the temple in Jerusalem of its silver and gold. He empties the royal treasuries, and he sends a massive bribe to Tiglath-Pileser III, the ruthless Neo-Assyrian emperor.
And the message attached to this treasury is chilling.
Oh, verse 7. It's crazy. Ahaz sends messengers saying, I am thy servant and thy son. Come up, and save me out of the hand of the king of Syria.
The phrasing of that diplomatic message is the hinge of the entire tragedy.
I am thy servant and thy son.
Yes. In the ancient Near East, treaties between a massive empire and a lesser nation were known as suzerain vassal treaties.
Okay, explain that for us.
They were deeply legal, cultural, and spiritual documents. By declaring himself the son of Tiglath-Pileser III, Ahaz is formally and legally abdicating the Davidic covenant.
Oh, wow. Because the covenant God made with David was a father-son relationship.
Exactly. God was the father, the Davidic king was the son, ruling as God's representative.
So Ahaz is voluntarily trading his identity.
Yes. He trades his identity as a son of Yahweh for the title Son of the Emperor.
He liquidates the sacred collateral of the temple just to purchase a worldly alliance.
And it works temporarily.
Right. He gets his immediate miracle. Verses 8 and 9 tell us Tiglath-Pileser III marches on Damascus. He destroys the city, kills King Rezin, and exiles the Syrian population to a place called Kir.
So Ahaz survives the siege.
But political salvation in the ancient Near East is never free. It comes with a crushing ideological tax. It's like Ahaz paid the mafia boss to clear out the local thugs, and now the mafia owns the entire city.
That's exactly what happens. Trusting human power over divine promise always results in enslavement.
And Assyria was not a gentle empire.
Not at all. The Neo-Assyrian Empire was arguably the most brutal military machine the ancient world had ever seen.
Tiglath-Pileser III really revolutionized warfare, didn't he?
He did. He instituted a massive standing army, advanced siege engines, and he utilized systematic psychological terror.
Mass flaying, impalement.
Yes, and the systematic deportation of entire populations to completely erase their cultural identity.
Which is what they just did to Syria.
Exactly. So, by inviting Assyria into the conflict, Ahaz gained short-term physical survival, sure, but he plunged Judah into long-term political vassalage and spiritual bondage.
He traded a light divine yoke for a crushing iron one.
Assyrians were not benevolent protectors. They were parasitic overlords. This short-sighted, fear-driven decision set the stage for the eventual destruction and exile of Judah itself down the line.
And the descent doesn't stop with a signed treaty and an empty treasury, does it?
No, it gets worse.
Because you cannot submit politically to an ancient empire without submitting religiously. The ideological tax demands physical space.
Right.
So Ahaz travels to the conquered city of Damascus to personally pay tribute and, kiss the ring of Tiglath-Pileser III.
A humiliating trip.
Very. But while he's walking through the ruins of his former enemy, he sees something that stops him in his tracks.
A majestic, massive pagan Syrian altar.
He's so captivated by its design that he sends the exact blueprints back to Jerusalem with orders to build a replica and replace God's altar.
We can call this the architecture of abandonment.
Oh, I like that.
It is a profound psychological phenomenon. The defeated falling in love with the aesthetic of their conqueror.
Like a spiritual Stockholm syndrome.
Exactly. Ahaz looks at the religion of Damascus, which couldn't even save Damascus from Assyria, mind you, and the religion of Assyria. And he concludes that their altars must be superior because our armies are superior.
He equates military dominance with spiritual truth.
Yes. So he sends the detailed architectural pattern back to Jerusalem.
He sends it to Urijah the priest.
Which brings us to a really tragic figure.
Yeah, the role of Urijah the priest is one of the most disturbing elements of this entire account.
It really is.
Urijah isn't some minor cleric. He is the high priest. His lineage traces back to Aaron. His entire life, his sacred duty, is to mediate between God and the people.
To guard the Torah and to protect the sanctity of the temple.
He wears the breastplate. He has the authority to inquire of God. Yet when he receives a blueprint for a pagan altar from a terrified, compromised king, he just rolls over completely.
The mechanism of Urijah's compromise is a chilling study in institutional cowardice.
How does the religious vanguard capitulate so easily?
It's stunning. Urijah doesn't push back at all.
He doesn't cite the book of Exodus.
No, he doesn't bring up the strict laws regarding how altars are to be built. He doesn't mobilize the priesthood to resist. He simply oversees the construction.
Before Ahaz even returns from Damascus, Urijah has the pagan altar built exactly to the king's specifications.
Urijah represents the archetype of the religious or institutional leader who alters divine truth to appease political power.
The pressure of the state just overrides him.
Yeah. The fear of the king's wrath, or perhaps the desire to maintain his prestigious position, overrides his sacred calling. He actively facilitates the desecration of his own domain.
It's like an autoimmune disease.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to look at it.
Ahaz didn't just invite a foreign pathogen Assyrian influence into the body. He used Eurasia to reprogram Judah's spiritual immune system to recognize the pathogen as the new normal.
Yes.
The nation wasn't dying from an external wound. It was dying because its own internal defense system, the priesthood and the temple, was rewritten to attack itself.
That metaphor captures the internal mechanics of syncretism perfectly.
Syncretism is a big word. Let's define that.
Syncretism isn't just adding a new god to the shelf. It is a fundamental reprogramming of how worship functions.
Blending faiths together.
Right. And when Ahaz returns to Jerusalem, he sees this massive new Syrian-style altar.
The synthetic altar.
Yes. And he begins offering the morning and evening sacrifices on it. He offers the burnt offerings, the meat offerings, the drink offerings.
But there is a logistical problem here in the courtyard.
A huge one. What does he do with Solomon's original brazen altar?
The bronze altar.
The altar that God himself designed and ordained through Moses.
He literally shoves it out of the way.
He physically relocates it.
Yeah, verse 14 says he moved the brazen altar from the center of the courtyard to the north side of his new synthetic altar.
And he claims he will keep it around just for his private inquiries.
Basically using the altar of Yahweh as a backup fortune-telling device.
To understand the gravity of this, we really must look at how the ancient Near Eastern mind understood an altar.
It wasn't just a table.
An altar was not a barbecue pit. It was viewed as a cosmic portal.
A dimensional aperture.
Yes, a localized intersection where the divine realm met the physical world. The brazen altar was built strictly on divine revelation.
Its dimensions and materials were dictated by God to Moses.
It was the central place of substitutionary atonement.
And Ahaz replaces an altar of divine revelation with an altar of human preference.
He shifts the theology of Judah from what God commanded to what the king finds aesthetically pleasing.
Or politically expedient.
Exactly. By moving the brazen altar to the periphery, Ahaz is making a massive spatial and theological statement.
Which is,
Yahweh is no longer the center of national life. He is a marginalized private deity subordinate to the new spectacular religion of state power.
imagine a CEO taking the company's most vital, successful core product, throwing it in a closet, and installing the logo of the hostile takeover firm right in the lobby.
Just because he thought it looked more modern.
Exactly. It's madness. Ahaz is completely redesigning the spiritual landscape of his nation based on his own trauma and fear.
But he doesn't stop at the courtyard.
No, he doesn't. The desecration continues into the very structure of the temple itself.
He moves from building something new to actively dismantling the ancient sacred architecture.
He attacks the furnishings detailed back in 1 Kings chapter 7.
Ahaz systematically dismantles the bronze artifacts crafted during Solomon's reign.
Verse 17, he cuts off the borders of the bases.
He takes down the laver, which was the massive bronze basin used for the priestly ritual washings.
And most shockingly, he goes after the brazen sea.
Yes.
That was an enormous reservoir of water.
Huge. And he removes it from off the backs of the 12 cast bronze oxen that supported it.
And he places it directly onto a stone pavement.
He completely destroys the structural integrity and the symbolic majesty of the temple furnishings.
He is canceling the architectural claims of Yahweh's sovereignty.
He really is. Those 12 oxen represented the 12 tribes of Israel supporting the living waters of God.
Facing north, south, east, and west.
Yes. Taking the sea off the oxen breaks the visual theology of the unified nation under God.
And he does all of this, the text explicitly says in verse 18, for the king of Assyria.
He is hollowing out his own sacred spaces just to prove his loyalty to a foreign dictator. Which is just so incredibly sad.
But when we elevate our perspective above the geopolitical maneuvering and the architectural vandalism, we see something else entirely.
The true, unseen spiritual war.
Exactly. There is a war raging in the background of 2 Kings 16. Satan is utilizing the political terror of the Syro-Ephraimite alliance.
The fear of Pekah and Rezin.
Right. And he's using the overwhelming military dread of Assyria and the wicked, cowardly heart of Ahaz for one singular purpose.
To extinguish the house of David.
Yes. If the Davidic line is either wiped out by Rezin and Pekah, or so thoroughly corrupted by Ahaz that it ceases to carry the covenant.
The messianic promise fails.
The entire redemptive plan for humanity collapses.
The unseen stakes are absolutely breathtaking. It is a war of cosmic proportions fought through treaties, altars, and bronze oxen.
But here is where the providence of God intercepts human rebellion.
Despite Ahaz's staggering apostasy.
Despite the horrific child sacrifice in the Valley of Hinnom.
Despite liquidating the temple treasury and importing a pagan altar.
God's covenant holds. It does. Verse 20 tells us, Ahaz dies at the age of 36.
A short, disastrous life.
And the chroniclers in 2 Chronicles actually tell us he was so despised by his own people that he wasn't even buried in the tombs of the kings.
He leaves behind a legacy of absolute ruin.
But he leaves behind his son,
Hezekiah.
which is just incredible grace.
A son who will inherit a vassal state, a looted treasury, and a desecrated temple.
Yet he goes on to become one of the greatest reformers in the history of Judah.
Hezekiah reverses the abominations of his father and sparks a massive spiritual revival.
It proves that human capacity for self-destruction is vast, but it cannot override the divine commitment to preservation.
God's patience was stretched to the absolute breaking point, but his promise remained unbroken.
That tension is incredible. Human rebellion meeting God's unbreakable covenant.
It is the story of the Bible, really.
Now, the history of Ahaz and the Assyrian Empire might seem, locked away in the dust of the ancient Near East.
Sure.
But the human tendencies on display in this chapter are terrifyingly relevant right now.
They are very much alive.
The psychological progression of fear, the institutional cowardice, the desperate need to mimic the power structures of the world, these are not ancient problems. They're human problems.
Absolutely.
So what does the tragedy of Ahaz mean for you, the listener, navigating the modern world today?
Well, first, it stands as a severe, unflinching warning to the rebellious sinner.
The lesson of Ahaz.
Right. The lesson is that running to the world, to secular power structures, to compromising alliances, to unethical pragmatism for help in times of crisis only results in enslavement.
Idolatry is fundamentally parasitic.
Whether it is an ancient altar or a modern obsession with status, wealth, or political security, you run to it to save your life, and it slowly consumes it.
It takes everything.
Ahaz thought he was managing a crisis. He was actually engineering his own captivity.
That's a profound warning. But what about for the believer?
Right.
For someone trying to maintain their faith in a culture that feels increasingly hostile or overwhelming, how does this chapter serve as a blueprint for, mind renewal?
Well, the New Testament teaches that the believer is now the temple of the Holy Spirit.
The physical architecture of Solomon's temple has been replaced?
Exactly. It's been replaced by the internal spiritual architecture of the human heart.
Okay, so how does that apply here?
This means we must fiercely guard our minds against syncretism. Every single day, we are pressured to import the altars of Damascus into our lives.
Oh, that's a great way to frame it.
We are tempted to adopt the philosophies, the corporate metrics of success, the political ideologies, and the aesthetic compromises of our surrounding culture.
Because they seem more powerful or relevant than God's simple truth.
Exactly. We look at the culture, we look at the rising empires of our day, and we think, well, their altar is bigger, their methods are shinier, they get immediate results.
It is the exact same imperial awe Ahaz felt when he walked into Damascus.
Yes. And when we bring those modern altars of Damascus into our lives, we slowly push the true altar, the cross, the clear teachings of Scripture to the periphery.
We relegate our faith to, private inquiries on Sunday mornings.
Right, while letting the culture dictate our functional daily worship.
Wow.
Believers must learn to keep their internal altars pure. We cannot rely on the Uriahs of our day.
The compromised leaders.
Institutions or leaders who will gladly bend divine truth to fit the current political or cultural moment just to maintain their influence. We have to guard the temple of the mind.
That brings us to a really piercing introspective question for you listening. If you were to conduct an architectural audit of your own life right now,
Your family, your daily habits, your media consumption, your financial decisions.
are there altars of Damascuses you have installed? Have you adopted the world's methods just to fit in?
Or perhaps, like Ahaz, you installed them out of a deep existential fear of the future, hoping they would buy you some security.
That is the mirror this text holds up to us. Are we trusting the covenant, or are we sending away our sacred treasures to buy a temporary shield?
It's a challenging question.
It really is. So as we bring this deep dive to a close, let's briefly trace the descent we just witnessed in chapter 16.
We started with the tragedy of a fractured nation.
A 200-year-old family feud that left Judah incredibly vulnerable.
We witnessed the geopolitical terror of the Syro-Ephraimite War.
A siege so terrifying it drove King Ahaz to a complete psychological breaking point.
Resulting in the unthinkable horror of sacrificing his own child in the fires of Gehenna.
We analyzed the institutional cowardice of Urijah the high priest, who abandoned his sacred post without even putting up a fight.
And we watched the tragic trade of a divine, eternal covenant for a worldly, suffocating alliance with Assyria.
A trade that literally rearranged the furniture of God's house just to appease a dictator.
So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you step back into your own reality.
I was here.
Ahaz traded the invisible sealed protection of God for the painted, visible face of Assyrian security.
He desperately wanted to look strong.
He wanted to look modern and secure to the watching world. But in his pursuit of control, he died a captive to his own fears, leaving a legacy of ruin.
So what's the ultimate question here?
The ultimate question 2 Kings 16 demands of us today is this. When the siege engines of life surround you, when the economy tanks, when the diagnosis comes, and the pressure is completely unbearable, whose name will you call out as your father? Will you declare yourself a servant of the world or a child of God?
What an incredible place to land.
Oh.
Thank you for taking this journey with us into the architecture of the mind, the mechanisms of compromise, and the resilient grace of God. Keep digging into these ancient texts, keep questioning the altars in your own life, and we will see you on the next deep dive.